Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we're all very excited about this new grant round. We have record funding available for this VLCF grant round, and we have new members that are eligible to apply with Virginia's federally and state recognized Indian tribes. So welcome to them, and welcome everyone else for joining us. We have our agenda here for you, and you'll see I'm going to provide a brief overview of the program and our additional scoring criteria, and then you're going to hear from our agency experts on our 5 different grant categories, and what will allow some time after each presentation for questions related to that topic. And then we also have time set aside at the end for questions from you for us to answer. Next. Okay, so some basics about our program. Oh, this is the wrong presentation. As Gina brings up the right presentation, I'm going to just get started on telling you about the amount of funding we have available this year. We have $12 million provided in the state budget, and we had almost $3 million returned from withdrawn grants. So we've got almost $15 million available, and we also trying to remember what's on that second or third slide. Here we go. Have the funds divided up, thank you, Gina, into the 5 categories. And you'll see that the amounts are different for each category, and that's due to the amount of funding that was returned. Next slide, please. So again, we have starting off this next slide with who can apply. State and local governmental entities can apply, as well as I said earlier, Virginia Indian tribes and qualified nonprofits as defined as holders in the Virginia Conservation Easement Act. VLCF requires a 50% match for the project's purchase price and due diligence costs. So applicants can seek up to 50% of those costs, unless they're a state agency or a tribe, and they can seek 100%. For those match requirements could be cash in hand or bargain sales. And we also provide a list of potential other grant sources on that website that you see here, which is on our DCR land conservation site. And I know Virginia Outdoors Foundation now has a couple of grant rounds open as well as a potential source for your project. Next slide. All projects must be for a specific site with the parcels clearly identified in your application. And you should only apply if you can anticipate your project closing within 2 years. We can award a 1-year extension if progress is being made and a little bit more time is needed. And our nonprofit applicants have to identify a public body partner who will co-hold an easement with them on their project. In our grant manual, we've got some very important information in the appendices. Appendix A provides a checklist of required items for a complete application. The next appendix provides the very important scoring sheets for the 5 categories, as well as the additional scoring criteria. And Appendix C provides an example match letter that is required if you do not have your match identified at the time you apply. And then Appendix D provides language that's going to be required if you are awarded a grant. And in order to get the VLCF payment, you also have to provide this language in your deeds that provides property protections for water quality and other statewide identified goals. We ask that you submit your application via email to Larry. His email address is here. And if you are expecting that your application is going to be larger than 20 megabytes, is that right? Then we ask that you submit it through our state file transfer platform, and that just takes an extra step. Larry will have to hook you up with some instructions, so please contact him the week before applications are due. And they are due on September 6th at 4 o'clock. Okay, so once you get us your applications, we get them to our interagency task force made up of the agencies you see here. And those are our agency experts that are with us today. And they'll score each category. And then we also have the additional scoring criteria. You'll see that's worth 72 points. And that's really important that you address all of those criteria. We also recommend that you choose a secondary category, just in case funding might be available in another category. So be sure to pick a secondary category if one is applicable to your project, and be sure that your application addresses all of the criteria for each category that you're applying under, as well as all of the additional scoring criteria. And the best way to make sure that your application addresses all the criteria is to score your application. That'll indicate to you where you might have forgotten to tell us about certain things. But please be aware that everything that's promised in your application will be required to be included in the final deed. And we provide an example here about if you promise to provide wider buffers, then we're going to expect those will be included in the final conservation easement on the property. So now I'll quickly go over the additional scoring criteria for a lot of different aspects. So I'm going to try to just go over them briefly. But if you have questions with any of these, please contact us. Gina and Larry and our contact information is provided on the last slide. The first criterion is the Virginia Outdoor Plan Identified Need, and the VLCF can be found at this website. And Crystal's going to go over this a little more in her presentation on open spaces and parks. So I'm just going to show you the website here, and then I'll let her address it in more detail when she presents. Next. Oops, I went twice. Okay, the Virginia Nature-Based Recreation Access Model will tell us the identified need for land and water-based access in your locality. This is totally based on where the project is located. To get to this map, you would go to our Natural Heritage Data Explorer, and we provide that link right here. And we use this model, this mapper, for a lot of our criteria. And to get here, you'll have to click on a couple of boxes. You don't need a membership to access this map. You just have to click on the disclaimer, and it'll take you to this screen. You type in the address of your project in that upper right-hand corner box, and hit enter, and it will zoom in to your address. And then on the left-hand side, in the drop-down menu, under conservation planning, you can find the recreation access model, and there's the aquatic and terrestrial. Then you will also provide extra points here if your project protects buffers beyond the 35-foot minimum required buffer width. And using again the NHDE, you can zoom into your project using the address and then switch the base map. Along the upper gray toolbar in the far left corner, you can see that orange rectangle. Click on that and then click on the USA Topo map, and all solid blue lines will be perennial streams or river frontage. And you can use in the toolbar, in the red circle is a ruler where you can measure the length of the streams and river frontage. There you go. Yes. We also provide points for protection of cultural resources. Here, we ask, does your project protect a local cultural resource? And if we provide some examples, and if there's something of importance on your property, please provide photos or documentation and tell us about what's there and how it will be protected. And also let us know if there's going to be public access available or educational opportunities provided. You can also get extra points if your project falls within other layers of Conserve Virginia. And again, to find Conserve Virginia, you go to NHDE and zoom into your project. And then the toolbar on the left-hand side, the drop-down menu for Conserve Virginia. And you can click on those different colored We've also got Gina's name and contact information there. She can help with all of these different technological issues. Well, we're having and she's working on our presentation right now. Throws it on us. Yeah. Okay. As you do this, I'm going to go to our grant manual and tell you about what else we have. Department of Wildlife Resources. I'm just going to continue as we work on getting the PowerPoint back up. There's a maximum of 10 points that can be awarded for identifying the wildlife habitat and human-wildlife interaction provided for by your project. Department of Wildlife Resources. We'll go back to it.
Yes.
Okay.
My screen.
Has their own Department of Wildlife Resources has their own website that provides what's the wildlife report, Larry? Wildlife Action Plan, and you can look at their Wildlife Action Plan and zoom in to your location. And they can provide you with a report of the species that are predicted to be at the property. And we have Becky Gwynn who works with us to score those points. And her contact information is provided in the grant manual. We also provide points. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is a screenshot of their website, and there's Becky's contact information. And here we are looking for, please identify wildlife no matter how small or big, or threatened or common, and you will get points. Next, we provide points for underserved communities. Here we recommend using the VIMS model, the VIMS Social Vulnerability Index. We have a screenshot of it here. And here we're looking for the index. And again, that red circle at the top of their toolbar, you can click on that and zoom into the address of your project. And if you disagree with what the VIMS model says and would rather use a different model, then please feel free. Just provide us with the link and the score for your project, and we'll take a look at that and consider it as well. And finally, the ratio of match. If the applicant is providing 60% or more of the total funding, and you provide an appraisal or a pre-appraisal, you can get up to 3 points right there. Okay, so the next slide. Sorry for all of our technical difficulties, but here's our contact information. Please let us know if you have questions. Meanwhile, are there any, before we move on to our Brady, who's going to cover our agriculture category, were there any questions in the comments? I don't think so. No. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so Brady, you're gonna, I hope this goes more smoothly for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
To share, it says that I need to ask you to make me a presenter.
I'm doing it right now.
Alrighty.
And again, I apologize for our fumbling. Yes, we'll be post this. We'll
She was attending today, and so I'm standing in for her. If you do have any questions, she would definitely be the best reference. Again, that's Jen Perkins with the Office of Farmland Preservation. But I'm going to go ahead and do the best I can for you today. So in the farmlands category, there's 3 scoring criterias that total 100 points. Those are land evaluation for 40 points, land use, which is also for 40 points, and then Conserve Virginia for a maximum of 20 points. Within the land evaluation category, it is broken down into 2 criteria. The first is the quality of the soils. This is worth up to 25 points. Within this, the applicant is responsible for identifying the percentage of the subject property that has prime and unique soils and or soils of statewide importance. And you can find this information on the USDA website. It's under the Natural Resources Conservation Service Web Soil Survey. And please note that if you do not include this information, the committee will assume that there are 0 soils that are unique and or of statewide importance. So you will get nothing in this category. This right here shows you what the web soil survey site looks like. This again is available from the USDA website, but the link to this site can be found in the grant manual. The second aspect of the land evaluation category is the size on the average size of the farm in relation to other farms within that same county. And so this criteria is worth 15 points. To determine this, you can use the U.S. Census of Agriculture. The new Ag Census should be coming out this year, but currently we're still referencing the 2017 data. The link for this is also in the grant manual. Points are awarded on a sliding scale, with full points going to properties that are 25% or more larger than the average property size. So in our second category of the three was land use. And again, this is a 40-point category. And the first aspect of that is the current and historical use of the property. This is pretty straightforward. You get 4 points if there are farming activities currently taking place on the property, and 4 points if the farm is a century farm. So there's a total of up to 8 points for this aspect of the land use category. You can find a county by county listing of century farms on the Virginia Department of Agriculture website. In the event that the farm qualifies as a century farm but has not yet been certified, please do reach out to Jen Perkins. As I mentioned, my colleague, she's the coordinator of the Office of Farmland Preservation. The approval process for a century farm is free of charge and can be processed pretty quickly. Just to describe the century farm program, a century farm has to have been a property that was a farm that was in the family, in your family for 100 years or more. It has to have been farmed on or lived on by a direct descendant for the duration of that time, and have more than $2,500 of annual. Okay. The second aspect of land use is 10 points for the proximity to other preserved lands. So points are awarded due to a property's proximity to other conserved lands, with the maximum points being awarded when the property is adjacent to another permanently protected open space, including properties with easements and state parks, etc. This information can be found on the website that Susan was mentioning earlier, the Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer. The Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer is also the source of the Conservation Development Vulnerability Model. This data ranks development vulnerability in 5 classes. This is another 8 points, a part of the land use category. This vulnerability is the property's relation to development pressure. So the more development pressure there is on the property, the more points that the property would get in the scoring criteria. It ranks the vulnerability in 5 classes, from class 1 or having minimal threat of development to class 5 or being very threatened by development. You can get 2 points for each class, up to 8 points. So a property that is classified as class 2 would get 2 points, and one that is classified as class 3 would get 4 points, and so on. Also in land use, we award up to 10 points for the implementation of agriculture BMPs, or best management practices, both that are specified in a farm management plan or those undertaken voluntarily. BMPs can include stream fencing, buffers, cover crops, conservation tillage, waste management, among other things. 4 points are awarded for any BMPs, either voluntary or through a state or federal conservation program. An additional 3 points will be added if the property has an active conservation plan prepared for by the Soil and Water Conservation District or an RCS. And a final 3 points can be added if the property has a nutrient management plan prepared by a DCR certified nutrient management planner. And then finally, in the land use category, so the land use category has several aspects there of that total 40 points, as you see. Finally is a 4-point section for the support by local policies. So 1 point each can be awarded for the demonstrated support of farmland protection in the locality's comprehensive plan, by agricultural zoning in the locality, the existence of ag and forestry districts in the locality, and if the locality has adopted use value taxation. The last category of the 100 points is the Conserve Virginia, which is has a 20-point maximum. If the property intersects with an ag and forestry layer of Conserve Virginia, points are awarded. And these points are awarded on a sliding scale based on the number of acres of the property that is within that layer. This information is also on the Virginia Natural Data Heritage Explorer. So if 50% or more intersects, 20 points can be awarded. If 50% or less, it would be 10 points awarded. And so again, I hope I provided at least some information to you that was beneficial. If you do have any questions, Jen Perkins is the best contact. Again, she's the coordinator of Office of Farmland Preservation. There's her information right there if you'd like to get that down really quickly, or you can also look her up on the VDAC's website. Jen did ask me to mention that it never hurts to add additional information on why the project is significant and important to protect in the narrative, even if it doesn't add points. So feel free to add that type of summary. And that really does, according to Jen, help the reviewers make decisions if the projects receive similar point totals, and can help bolster funding decisions when they are presented to the board.
Thank you so much, Brady. That was great. That was great. Next up, actually, with our questions here, for the agriculture category, I don't see any additional ones. All right. Thank you so much, Brady. Again.
You're welcome.
Next, Carl Didier with Department of Forestry will be presenting.
Hi, everybody. Let's see. Let me get myself going here.
Hi, Carl.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
A smoother project like Brady did, unlike me.
Whoop.
Awesome. Looks like you're doing well.
Are you seeing? You're seeing the wrong screen. Hold on a second. Did that wrong.
We're seeing your presentation.
Yeah, that was my fault. Oh, yeah. Susan, or Gina, can you take it away from me and then I'll do it again? Take away control. I screwed up.
Privileges.
There it is. I got it. Let's try that again. Sorry for that, folks.
Oh, no problem.
I just pressed the wrong button.
I guess I'll make him an organizer.
Hold on.
Oh, wait. You should still be a presenter.
Okay, you're right. There we go. I just like to have my notes if I forget anything.
There you go.
everybody. I'm Carl Didier. I'm the Forest Land Conservation Program Manager for the Department of Forestry. I'll go ahead and take you through, let's get the chat up. Oh, one meeting. Oh, wait, chat.
No, are you stuck now?
No, I'm just trying to get some things out of the way. Okay, here we go. I'll take you through the criteria for the forest land preservation category. I do want to say thank you for everyone for turning out. It looks like we had really good turnout for this workshop. I'm very pleased with that. The forestry category, as Susan mentioned, has $2.8 million in it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some great applications, some great projects and ambitious projects for this VLCF round. So the forest land preservation category has 8 basic criteria. You'll see that they're pretty simple as I go through them, that add up to 100 points, very similar to the farmland preservation category. And recall, as Susan mentioned, there are 9 additional scoring criteria that are relevant across all the grant categories, equaling an additional 72 points. So don't forget about those. But here are the 8 criteria. I'll go through them one at a time. I'll also use an example application for you so you can see how simple it really is. Let's assume we have a 500-acre property, and that property is 450 acres of it is forested, and 400 acres of that forest is what we call high forest conservation value, and I'll talk about that. 63% of the acreage is in Conserve Virginia. On this example property, there's over 6,000 feet of water courses or shoreline. There's 0.5 miles. It's 0.5 miles to the nearest conserved property, which is a wildlife management area. And the property already has a forest stewardship management plan, and they're working on implementing that plan as we speak. And the applicant, this is important, is willing to retain about 375 of the 450 acres of forest on the property. All of that information is relevant for the scoring criteria. So the first criteria is really simple. What's the property acreage? How big is it? If your property is between 0 and 1,000 or 999 acres, you use this simple equation right here. Property acres divided by 1,000 times 8. Determine your points, and if you're bigger than 1,000 acres, you get it on these categorical values. In terms of a graph, it looks kind of like that. So it's from 0 to 1,000, it's scaled by a line, and then you get extra points if you're a very large project. We don't get very large projects all that often. So for example, property, it's 500 acres in size, that gets them 4 points. The second criteria is how many acres of forest are on the property or forestland are on the property. Very similar idea. If you're 0 to 999 acres, you can get up to 18 points on a sliding scale. If you're greater than 1,000 acres, you get those points by those categories. So our example property is 450 acres of forest, and that gets them 8.1 points. The third criteria are acres that we consider as the Department of Forestry very high or very high forest conservation value. We use a model or a map that the Department of Forestry created in 2020, identifying which lands across the state were of high conservation value. You can see the legend there. The criteria that went into this model are listed there. I'm not going to talk into detail about what's in the model, just to say that very high conservation value equals a score of 4 or 5 on our map. If you have, again, it's a very similar idea, up to 1,000 acres of very high conservation value will get you up to 13 points, and categorically higher as that's shown. And the example property has 400 of the 450 acres are very high conservation value. score 4 or 5 on our model, and that's 5.2 points. You can find the FCV layer on the Natural History Data Explorer that we've already seen before. If you go and find the Conservation Planning group on the NHDE Explorer and you look under check and unfold the FCV layer, you'll see the map, you'll see the categories, and then you can add your property to the NHDE and visually estimate from the NHDE what percentage or how many acres. What you really want is how many acres are what are in categories 4 and 5. Everyone's going to know the size of the property, so you can estimate the percentage and just multiply it out to get the number of acres that are a very high conservation value. If you don't like that and you just want some help, you can ask to, you can go using the Natural History Data Explorer, get the GIS layer itself and work in GIS to estimate how much forest is there using the layer itself. Or if you're really struggling, just send me your polygon and I'll tell you what it is. I can do that pretty quickly in my GIS. We don't have that many applications. I'm certainly willing to help out there. The fourth criteria is how much of a contribution does the property make to water quality, and that's just measured by the total length of water courses on the property. That's the length of either intermittent or perennial water courses as identified by the USGS National Hydrography Dataset, as well as the shoreline of wetlands or water impoundments present on the property or bordering the property. You can see that data there. You can also see it on the NHDE Explorer. And points are awarded based on this basic equation. If you're from 0 to 15,000 feet of water courses on the property, you can get up to 15 points on a sliding scale. If you're greater than that, you'll get all 15 points. So our example property has about 6,200 feet. It's a little over a mile of water courses on the property, and that's worth 6.3 points. Then you can get this on the Natural History Data Explorer. If you go to reference layers, you'll see 2 layers there that you'll want to look at. There's a streams layer and a national wetlands inventory layer. You click both of those, zoom in into your property, and you can use that little measuring tool that Susan mentioned to estimate the linear amount of streams or shoreline of the wetlands and the streams. So you can see here what I would do and what I do when I score these is I just estimate how much edge you have there, and I include streams in that amount of edge. What you don't want to do here is double count. If there are streams in a wetland or in a lake or in a pond, that doesn't get counted twice. But you can see how that works. If you have any questions, you can always ask me. The fifth criteria is adjacency to conserved lands. This is very similar to what we saw in the farmlands category. If you're greater than 5 miles away from a conserved land, you don't get any points. If you're within 5 miles, it's a sliding scale like this, where it's just 5 minus the number of miles away you are from the nearest conserved land. If you're right next to a conserved land, you get all 5 points. Our example property is 0.5 miles away, so that's 5 minus 0.5, you get 4.5 points. The sixth criteria is really there to help us emphasize the importance of having a forest management plan and implementing that forest management plan on properties that are within this category. So the criteria will measure the status. We'll look at the status of the forest management plan, ask if it's prepared by a professional forester. We need to indicate whether or not it was prepared by a professional forester, and we'll ask what the status of the implementation of that forest management plan is. So be very clear about whether or not you have a forest management plan, whether it was prepared by a forester, a professional forester, and whether or not you've done something to start implementing that plan. If you have an existing plan, but it's being implemented, you'll get 5 points. If the plan exists, but there's no evidence that it's been implemented or no plan to implement it, the forest is just sitting there with no management whatsoever, you'll get 3 points. And if there's no plan, it's 0 points. The seventh criteria is how much of the forest land is the landowner willing to commit to conserving? And that's pretty simple. It's the proportion of the forest land that's on the property that the landowner is going to commit to preserving times 10. So I do want to mention that forest land that does not currently have trees on it, it's been heavily harvested, etc. It will be replanted or regenerated, does count as preserved forest land, land that you will preserve. So just because you harvest your trees or you clear cut does not mean that that doesn't count as land that you will preserve as the forest land base. So for example, in our property, there was 450 acres of forest on the property, 375 of which the landowner is willing to preserve. You multiply that by 10 and you get 8.3 points. 83% of the property gets you 8.3 points. Finally is the same category we saw before for the forest, for the farmlands category. It's how much of the property is within the Conserved Virginia layer of the agriculture and forestry category within Conserved Virginia. You just take the proportion of that and multiply it by 20 on a sliding scale. So if 100% of it is in the agriculture and forestry category, you'll get all 20 points. If none is, you'll get 0. Just slides from there. So here's just the example results for our little example property. Gets a total of 54 points out of potential 100. Just a few suggestions for this category. It's usually pretty competitive. So we highly recommend you run the scoring sheet yourself ahead of time and provide evidence in your application for why it should score high. In some of these cases, if something looks wrong on the layers that you're looking at, the forest conservation value layer, the streams layer, the wetlands layer, and you think you should get more points because actually what's on your property is more than that, tell us and demonstrate it with some evidence. Provide us a map, for example, of your GPS streams. If you think the streams that are on the Natural History Data Explorer aren't right, are shorting you in terms of number of intermittent or perennial streams, let us know, provide us a map, show us some data, show us some evidence, and we'll consider that. That happens also with the FCV category. Sometimes the model will identify a piece that is actually forest land as not being forest land because of the problems of heavily harvested properties are hard to see from satellite imagery. So just let us know and we'll take that into consideration. Sometimes there are errors in these base maps. Pay attention to the secondary category designation here. Again, we're a highly competitive category, so if there's some funds left over in another category, that's very good to know. And make sure you complete your application and respond to all criteria and questions. That's it from me. Thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to some good applications in this category.
Thank you so much, Carl. Are there any questions for Carl? I don't see any on mine. Did you have any?
I was 100% clear, Susan. No question.
That's great. That's great.
Thanks.
And what I'm thinking is for our website, I think we should post our PowerPoints as well as the recording. So those of you who haven't gotten your PowerPoints, please do share a copy so we can get that on our website.
Absolutely.
And then up next we have Carrie Richardson from Department of Historic Resources. Carrie, I hope you have a smooth presentation.
Thank you. And here we go.
Right.
All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
And is it moving forward?
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
All right. All right. Well, as Sue said, my name is Carrie Richardson, and I am the Easement Program Specialist here at the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and I am pleased to present the Historic Area Preservation Category Criterion. As Sue mentioned, we have $3 million in the Historic Area Preservation category for this grant round, so we are, like Carl, looking forward to a lot of great applications. Before I delve into the details on all of our criterion, I just wanted to state up front what makes a strong grant application in the Historic Area Preservation category. Strong applications protect a historic resource that is listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register, is located on a Civil War, American Revolutionary War, or War of 1812 battlefield, or is formally determined eligible for listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register, and retains a high degree of historic integrity, and relates to Virginia's culturally diverse history, and or has special community significance related to its history, and is included in the Conserve Virginia cultural and historic preservation layer. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, which we'll get into right now. Like the 2021 grant round, this year the Historic Area Preservation category has 8 criterion. For anyone that may have applied to this category before last year, we did make a few changes to the scoring criterion in 2021, and most notably is the addition of criterion number 2, which deals with underrepresented communities and resources and is worth 10 points. And we'll have a little more on that in a minute. So moving on to the criterion. The first criterion is the historic significance, and this can be broken down into 3 sub-criteria. If the property is listed individually on the Virginia Landmarks Register, or is a contributing resource to a historic district listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register, the project will receive 25 points. If the property is not listed on the VLR but has been determined eligible by DHR for listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register, the project will receive 20 points. The eligibility determination is made through DHR's process for evaluation and listing on the VLR. An official listing on the VLR may be required for properties awarded funding under this section. If you have any questions regarding listing status, please feel free to contact me or to refer to DHR's register webpage, and I'll have a link to that at the end of this PowerPoint. The next, I'm sorry, we're still in criterion number 1, believe it or not. The next one is if the historic resource or property is located on a Civil War, Revolutionary War, or War of 1812 battlefield or site, the project will receive 25 points. The battlefield or site must be identified with a priority rating in one of the following reports administered by the National Park Service's American Battlefield Protection Program, such as the report on the nation's Civil War battlefields, the report to Congress on the historic preservation of Revolutionary War and War of 1812 sites in the United States. If you are uncertain if your property falls within the boundaries of a recognized battlefield, again, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I will be happy to find out if your property falls within those boundaries. The final part of historic significance criterion is integrity. Integrity is the ability of a project to convey its historic significance through attributes such as location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. If a property has a high degree of integrity, the project will receive 5 points. Criterion number 2 is underrepresented communities and resources with a maximum score of 10 points. During the General Assembly's 2021 session, it approved a legislative change that enables the Virginia Board of Historic Resources to hold easements on properties that are not designated landmarks or listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register, or battlefield properties, but are historically significant and whose perpetual preservation and protection remains consistent with the mission of DHR and the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. DHR's goal is to provide expanded access to the easement program and improve underrepresentation of Virginia's diverse communities for the purposes of historic preservation. A project will receive 5 points if it includes documented resources representing Virginia's culturally diverse history, such as places associated with people of color, the Reconstruction era, civil rights movement, LGBTQ, African American, Asian American, Latino, Hispanic, Native American, or women's history. And a project will receive an additional 5 points if the property or area includes a special community significance related to its history, as explained in the application. And this is regardless of formal documentation. Again, it is not necessary that a property be formally listed on the VLR. However, it is required to be approved at the preliminary information form, also known as PIF, level of the listing process. And again, for more information on this, please feel free to contact me directly. The third criterion is threat, with a maximum score of 10 points. Properties currently on the market for sale, threatened by development, in an estate being settled, or in imminent danger of demolition will receive 10 points. If a property was recently, within the last year, for sale, it is currently vacant or unoccupied or significantly deteriorated and in need of immediate preservation, it will receive 5 points. We do require documentation of the above threats, and that can include things like a real estate listing, a recent will, or other title documentation, a subdivision plan, or photographs showing the poor condition of the property. If we do not receive supporting documentation, no points will be awarded. Please note that failure to provide threat documentation is a common mistake by grant applicants, and it definitely results in the loss of significant points. The fourth criterion is use and treatment of historic resources and of the property. The maximum score here is 10 points. For this criterion, we want to know if the applicant's future uses of the property include appropriate care and treatment of the historic resources and/or the historic landscape. The applicant will receive 5 points if their plans for future uses of the property are appropriate and consistent with the historic resource stewardship and protection. And the applicant will receive 5 points if their plans for the treatment, alteration, and maintenance of the historic resources on the property are acceptable and generally consistent with historic resource stewardship and protection standards. And if the applicant provides no future plans for the property or treatment of the historic resources, they will receive no points. If you have any related reports, plans, or studies detailing your future plans for the property and/or historic resources, we encourage you to submit them with the application. And all proposals must be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for treatment of historic properties. If you are unfamiliar with these standards, again, please do not hesitate to contact me. The fifth criterion is historic resource protection. The maximum score here is 10 points. Here we are looking to see that the applicant has reviewed and understands DHR's easement template. If you need a copy of the easement template, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to forward one to you at my earliest convenience. If after reviewing DHR's template, applicants have any further questions, again, please don't hesitate to contact me. Our objective here is to gauge the degree to which the applicant is willing to preserve all historic resources on the property in perpetuity in accordance with DHR's template. A project will receive 10 points if their proposed easement terms and restrictions provide comprehensive protections for the historic resources on the property and are specifically consistent with DHR's template. Or if an applicant's terms are generally consistent with the DHR template, the project will receive 5 points. All applicants must attach a summary of the proposed restrictions to be included in the easement. Please do not attach a copy of our template. And again, if you have any questions on this, please feel free to reach out to me. And criterion 6 is adjacency to conserved lands. The maximum score here is 5 points. If a property is immediately adjacent to other conserved lands, like the example on the right, the project will receive 5 points. If a property is within the viewshed of or in close physical proximity to significant historic resources and/or existing conserved lands, like the example at the lower right, the project will receive 3 points. Finally, if the property is not in the viewshed or in close physical proximity to other conserved lands, but represents a unique cultural resource within a geographical area, the project will receive 1 point. Criterion 7 is furthers public interest, and the maximum score here is 5 points. For this criterion, we are looking to see if and or how a project promotes research, education, community outreach, and or heritage tourism. So if the project includes specific plans for programs that further public interests, the project will receive 5 points. If the project includes general plans for programs to be developed for research, education, community outreach, and or heritage tourism, the project will receive 3 points. And if the project includes no plans, the project will receive no points. Applications that conserve resources associated with underrepresented communities and provide public educational opportunities to share untold stories and advance social equity are particularly encouraged. And our last criterion is Conserve Virginia. The maximum score here is 20 points. Here we want to know if the property is located within the cultural and historic preservation layer of Conserve Virginia. To calculate points, I'm sorry. If the property is entirely within the cultural and historic preservation layer, like the example on the left, the project will receive 20 points. If the property is partially within the historic preservation layer, like the example on the right, we measure how many acres are within the layer, determine the percentage of the property within the layer, and then multiply that by 20 to calculate the final points. In this example, the property is eligible for 3 points only. And additional requirements for the historic area preservation category include the submission of high quality photographs or digital images. If your historic resource is a building or a structure, we require the exterior of the primary facades of the building and any secondary building structures, architecturally significant interior spaces and features, and the setting and view shed of the primary resource. If your historic site is an archaeological site, please include photographs of the general view or site plan and images documenting the condition of the site. And finally, if your resource is a battlefield, please include photographs of the overall site, its setting and view shed, and all historic and non-historic structures, roads, and other features within the battlefield or site. For projects awarded grant funds in the historic area preservation category, the property owner shall offer to convey a perpetual historic preservation easement on the property to the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. The board decides whether to accept the easement offer based on established criteria and policies governing DHR's easement program. The property must meet easement program eligibility requirements, or DHR may recommend another easement holder. Listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register, again, may be required, dependent upon the situation and the property. And finally, properties are required to be open to the public for public access for a minimum of 2 days per calendar year. And here is a snapshot of our easement application, which will be required if you are awarded a VLCF grant, and as well as my contact information and a list of important links to our website. And that's all I have today. I will hand it back over to Sue.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for a very informative presentation. Next, I don't see we have any questions. And Rob Evans with DCR's Natural Heritage Program will be presenting our natural area preservation category. Oh, we might have one question. Let's see. Okay, no.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
We're not in presenter mode yet.
How about now?
Not yet.
Hmm.
If you do from beginning, that upper left-hand corner toolbar, click on from beginning.
Yeah, that's what I've got. It's showing like on my screen. How about if I
Okay.
advance?
I mean, we can see. We can see the regular view, not the presenter view, but this is fine.
Try that. Is that any
No,
better?
it must just be us at DCR that are having problems with presenting. That's so funny. No, you're good.
Okay, I hope everyone can see it.
Yes, thank you, Rob.
Okay, excuse me. All right. This is for the natural area category, and I'll just start out by reminding people why the category exists and why the Natural Heritage Program deals in this category. And it's based on the 1989 Natural Area Preserve Act that directed the Department of Conservation to do what it says right on that slide, which hopefully you can read. And it also established and created the Heritage Program, and one of the main goals of creating our program was to select and nominate areas that have heritage resources.
Okay, Rob. Rob, somehow you got muted and your slides aren't advancing. Rob, are you still there? Okay, there we go. That's the second slide. We can't hear you now.
Anyone still there?
Yep, there you are.
Okay.
Okay, so we got a comment that they can't read your slide.
Okay.
I don't know why you can't go to presenter or to slideshow.
Yeah, it's on. Try it one more time.
How about if you click on, you know where it says animation pane, click on that little X to the right of animation pane to at least close that.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Let's see.
I suspect when you presented, this is Carl, you probably shared the wrong screen. Probably got two screens up.
Yeah. How about that, guys?
That's better.
Okay, can you read it? Can you read it now? Anyone?
The slides itself, not the presentation. But it's good enough to read.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So it did direct, this law designates our program to establish natural areas, is primarily the gist of it. And here's a little map across the state that indicates the 66 existing natural area preserves that we currently have. And this is just pointing out, if you can see the little pictures coming up beside them, each preserve has one or more natural heritage resources in mind at the preserve that we're trying to protect at that given site.
Again, Rob, we're not seeing your slideshow. So if you're going to advance this way without changing your screen, yeah, you just need to click within PowerPoint and move to the next slide. But we're not seeing the slideshow, no animation, anything like that.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I can try it one more time. Can anybody see it now?
Yeah, nothing.
Huh. Sue or Gina, is there any way you guys can open that one that I sent you? Okay.
Yes, Gina's got it open and she can take over.
Okay, I'll back out of the share. Sorry about that, people. Gina, could you talk everybody through it as well?
You wish.
Okay, you can just advance to the second slide, please. So there's back to the legislation. And everyone can now read, at least I can read that, so thank you. And there's the preserve network, go ahead. Just showing you there's a scattering of small preserves all around the state, 66, and each has a, I'm gonna call it a focal species. Approximately 60,000 acres makes up the statewide system right now. and protects in concert the largest collection of rare natural features in the state system of public lands. Go ahead, Gina. Keep going. Oh, go back. Right there. Thank you. So I won't go super deep into this, but to be eligible for the category of natural area, here are the top 5 points that you need to consider and that we will consider. Each project must, as you can see right there, contribute significantly to natural heritage resource protection. And in a moment, we'll talk about what natural heritage resources actually are. You need to provide sufficient evaluation from us. Someone on our staff has got to go and be able to evaluate the place. The project must be supported by receptive landowners. We're not trying to take anything away from people. And all of the property must qualify to be dedicated in perpetuity as a natural area preserve. And then finally, recommendation from the Heritage Program is needed to make this project eligible. Go ahead, Gina. So what are natural heritage resources? They're essentially rare things, rare elements of biodiversity. And the examples we keep track of are natural communities, rare plants, rare animals, including some insects, and significant caves. And those numbers there give you an idea of how many different types there are. So statewide, there's 731 different plant species that, because of their rarity and threats, qualify as natural heritage resources. We take all the known locations of those and map them. So across all categories, we have around 10,000 individual occurrences or instances where one of these things is found. Would you go ahead, Gina? Just keep panning through those pictures, and they're all different things. And they're, in case you're wondering, I know you can't really see it at this scale, but there's pretty much going to be a natural heritage resource really across the state. Anywhere in the Commonwealth, there is the potential for one. And you can find where these are by using your NHD that people have been talking about, or reach out to us and we'll help figure it out for you. Go ahead, Gina. So we talked about a deed of dedication. Each project submitted to this category has to be eligible for the entire property to be placed under a deed of dedication, which is essentially like a perpetual conservation easement. So obviously perpetuity is key. We're not going to do a deed of dedication for a limited number of years. This is forever. There's going to be terms in the deed that try to impose no impairment of the area that supports the heritage resources, and that in fact the area is managed in concert with the values that are there for the heritage resource. Any incompatible uses, let's just say quarrying, as an example, are absolutely prohibited. And there's a list of those in this technical report that I'm citing there. If you have any questions about certain kinds of activities that you may or may not want to propose, you can talk about those with us. And of course, we allow anything that's compatible with the preservation of the heritage resource. So for example, low impact nature study and research are perfect examples of that. And if it's a proposal in which a landowner is going to own the property and you're only proposing a easement or deed of dedication, before the property closes and becomes a preserve, and before you get a penny of your VLCF money, we're going to work out a management plan between the landowner and the program where it spells out all the terms and conditions of what needs to be done on that given site to perpetuate those resources. Who's going to do it, how often it's done, and the things that aren't going to be done. And if we can't come to terms on that and get signatures from the landowner and the program, then the project dies on the vine. Could you advance, please, Gina? as each project comes in, every project will be evaluated by standard criteria that are listed in the grant manual. I'm going to mention them. I won't go into as much detail as some others have done, but I will remind you of these two things here, that each applicant has to demonstrate to us that they have the necessary commitment and capability to manage the property if an easement is being proposed in a way that will support those heritage resources. And a reminder that the entire property will be dedicated. Go ahead, that's fine, Gina. And just as an example, this isn't typical of every site, but to show an example of the types of management that might be deemed necessary, what you're seeing there is a prescribed fire crew in the middle of a prescribed burn. That's obviously a very labor and management intensive activity. So if that is deemed necessary, the applicant needs to discuss how they're going to implement fire on the site and who they're going to work with to get that done. Go ahead, please. And part of that will, can you back up just 1 second, please? Thank you. Part of that, to understand exactly what type of management is going to need to take place, we will work with the landowner and the applicant to evaluate the short and long-term stresses, or what we call them, and management needs. There may well be certain things that are so unmanageable that it's just not possible or not needed, all the way up to very high intensity management like regular prescribed burning. Go ahead. What does it take to get DCR's recommendation to support a project? It comes down to items like this. And again, these are discussed at length in the manual, and it shows you how you can get points and how many points. But it really comes down, first of all, to the significance of the conservation values that are present, and that's primarily measured by what heritage resources are there and how significant is that project for that resource. One way to get a streamlined view of that is to look in your NHDE, and we have a listing for what are called essential conservation sites. There's a flag in there, and you can look to see if there's any so-called essential site in your vicinity. These have been deemed to be some of the most important and essential for conservation places around the state, meaning they have the best example of a heritage resource, or in some cases, perhaps the only example remaining in Virginia. Within that, we also consider the rarity of that element at a both state and global level. And again, in your heritage database, it will give you rankings for each of the heritage resources present. So we're concerned about those in terms of the global rarity as well as how common they are here. And then we'll be looking at the ecological integrity. That gets down to the size of the parcel and the population, as well as the expected viability of the resource that's present. And as you'll be reminded again, your capability and or our assistance to a landowner to protect that site from those threats. Go ahead, Gina. As we pointed out, some of our staff must be given the timely opportunity to visit a property. And part of what we'll do there is determine whether or not there are any natural heritage resources and make an estimate of the quality of those. In many cases, we might already know a little bit about that, but if you think you have something that hasn't been documented in NHDE, this is a chance for us to document that. And I put timely in there because most people would be aware that not everything can be found at all times of the year. For example, you can picture a plant species that comes up in flowers early in spring and then kind of fades away. It would be pretty impossible to maybe identify that at this time of year. So the sooner you know what you're trying to consider, the sooner you let us know, the better. So we'll be looking for those heritage resources. We'll be evaluating the management needs and the threats, and we'll talk to the landowner. And in this case, we really want to see the landowner. I know many times there's an agent or a representative who's bringing the project to bear, but in the end, it's the landowner who will be burdened in a way with working with DCR in perpetuity. So we need to talk to them. and discuss exactly what needs to be done and what the implications are if their project is dedicated in perpetuity. Go ahead, Gina, please. And there again is just the summary of the scoring criteria, so you can get these in the manual. And like Carl and others suggested, we're not fixed on what score you think you have. It will get scored as objectively as possible based on the criteria that are there, but I do suggest you look at it and respond in writing to the criteria and decide if you think you have a project that fits this category. And again, we'll be looking, you see the bulk of the points come from the biodiversity significance. And again, coming back to the quality, quantity, and significance of any heritage resources present. And to be eligible, you have to have one. So if you don't know that you have one of the documented significant natural heritage resources, this category probably isn't for you. And I'll remind you there that the essential conservation sites get the most scoring, and those are found in NHDE. We look at the ecological integrity of the project, and that is based in part on where the parcel sits in the regional landscape and whether or not it's connected to other managed area lands, and whether or not it lies within what we call ecological cores. And those are also mapped and displayed in NHDE. And based on which type of core, if any, you're in, the biggest, most contiguous cores, the C1s, get the most points on down to the smallest or outside of any existing footprint. We've already talked about the management needs, but there are a lot of points there. So that's a big one, and many people wait till the last second and don't give DCR enough time to really get out there and talk to people. So I just, again, strongly encourage people to bring it to our attention as soon as possible. And like everybody else, look at Conserve Virginia. And in this case, the category is the natural habitat and biological diversity category. How much of your project overlays that? Gina, would you forward, please? So we've talked about it a million times, as has everybody else. There's just a snapshot of NHDE. And you can see some of the layer lists over there on the left side. And if you have trouble working your NHDE, you can call us. I know Gina and Sue and Larry know how to use it as well, so just reach out to us, even for other categories, although we're not the best at those categories. Thank you, Gina. So yeah, we want applications, so please talk to us. Go ahead. And the mission for conserving biodiversity really is in our hands on this thing. That's why this category exists. Please go forward. And that's why we all know that. Until it's saved, it's not saved. It could be lost. So please go ahead one more. I'll bring this out. The green bars here represent the number of acres that all partners across Virginia have conserved since 2005. And everybody's pretty proud and patting ourselves on the back about how many acres go under conservation. You can see that it's over 1,280,000 acres. But from the standpoint of the biodiversity mission, the little black bar represents the percentage of those acres in those different time periods that have been conserved that actually have any type of heritage resource, meaning the rarest components of our biodiversity. So very, very small percentages of existing projects that come in statewide that count as managed areas are conserving the things that we care about. So we really ask for your help to help find these places and get them conserved. Go ahead, Gina. And if we're successful with the preserve system and what you help us do, we'll kind of knit together this kind of quilt of the special places and the natural landscapes that really represent what Virginia is most special for. And go ahead. And there's a contact number, so if you have any questions, reach out. And we thank you for your help, and especially Gina for pushing the slides around. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was great. Are there any questions for Rob right now? Okay, well, let us know while Crystal gets her PowerPoint up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Crystal.
Good afternoon,
Crystal
everyone.
is with our DCR's Planning and Recreation Resources Division, and she's going to present our open spaces and parks category. And hopefully, look at that, Crystal, you're a pro.
Well, during these times, I've done a lot of online presentations, and I'm so glad to see so many people logged in today interested in this program. Let me just do one more thing. Excuse me. So I am Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Chief Recreation Grants Manager within the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. And as we all know, there is much demand for quality open spaces and parks within the Commonwealth. This category for this year has $3,390,000 worth of funding. All right, so the information about the open space and parks category begins on page 12 of the VLCF manual. And please note that these projects will also be evaluated on the additional scoring criteria that Sue discussed at the beginning of this webinar. All projects get scored in their specific category as well as that comprehensive scoring criteria. I highly recommend that you answer all of the associated questions to the best of your ability. And the scoring rubric for open space and parks begins on page 27 of the manual. So I'm going to walk through the different specific category criteria. So there is a continued high demand for public access sites for water-based recreation throughout the Commonwealth. Therefore, part of the scoring relates to whether the project acquires land or a conservation easement that provides increased public access to state waters offering recreational potential. The scoring is based on how many different water-based recreational opportunities will be available, differentiated between these three things: boating, fishing, swimming, and then also wildlife viewing opportunities. The more types of recreation, water recreation, the higher the score. So this is a maximum of 10 points in this category. Next is the project location. This is basically scoring criteria based on if it is a standalone facility or an addition to an existing recreation site. So creating a new recreation site is worth 10 points, and expanding an existing site is 5 points. And then the third part is scenic resources. I'll connect to the Virginia Outdoors Plan in a minute, but scenic resources are very important to everyone recreating in the Commonwealth, and this protects the scenic viewsheds or land important to the protection of designated or proposed scenic resources. So there is a variety of designated scenic resources, including wild and scenic rivers, American heritage rivers, Virginia's Scenic River Program, also scenic roads and Virginia byways. And then additionally, if the project will then conserve land adjacent to or in direct viewshed of a recreational trail, such as greenways, blueways, statewide trails, that would get 5 points. So please do look at that pretty carefully. And the way you can find out if your land is near these scenic resources is on the Virginia Outdoors Plan Mapper. So this is publicly available on the DCR website. The link is here. And then you would click the image, acknowledge that you read the disclaimer, and it'll open up right for you. There's a large list of layers, and you can see that there's scenic rivers, blueways, and there's many others, but this was one example of the different things you can see. If you click these three dots, you can obtain more information about what the symbology means and things like that. All right, then we also want to know if your project aligns with any local or regional plans. So this could be perhaps a town comprehensive plan, or if you have a specific locality recreation plan, please do cite the name and page number of that. You can include like 1 page or 2 pages that are relevant, but please don't fill the whole application with the whole document, just hopefully a link to where we can then find that and just what's specifically needed. This is for a maximum of 15 points, so it depends on if this project is mentioned specifically by location and purpose, or if it's mentioned more generally. So please do consider that and look through the different plans that you have on file. So we have been talking in some of these sessions about the Virginia Outdoors Plan. The current plan still is the 2018. We're in progress and moving forward with our 2023 release for next year, Virginia Outdoors Plan, Recreation for All, but do reference the 2018 for the purposes of this grant round. This is Virginia's official outdoor recreation and land conservation plan, known as the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, and all of this relates to the Land and Water Conservation Fund and other grant programs. So we have this totally digital on our website, and it also includes regional priorities. So I would strongly recommend that you look at your regional section as well as the overall information. So if you click into the Virginia Outdoors Plan, you'll find that there are multiple survey results about what the public outdoor recreation survey recommended. And the scoring for this part of the criteria is additive. So the top need was natural areas access and developed parks access, and then also access to water trails, historic areas, biking, equestrian trails, and other needs. And I'll go ahead and show you the next page. This was from the Virginia Outdoors Demand Survey, a listing in order of priority from the public demand of what people do want to experience with outdoor recreation opportunities. So that is why we have the different ranking, but you can do additive up to 10 points on that scoring criteria. And then public utilization is important. What is the availability of the land for public use? So how many days basically will that site be open and unrestricted to public visitation? That's a maximum of 10 points as well. And then we do want to see if this opportunity provides outdoor recreation resource for an underserved community. And Sue did hit on this a little bit, but the Virginia Institute of Marine Science does have a social vulnerability index model, and that is what we currently use in Virginia to assess that. You can use data from other sources if you do provide the source reference and what that criterion means. So there's an area to kind of state your case, and the maximum for this is 15 points in this criteria. And just a view of that VIMS Virginia Vulnerability Viewer, I do just want to note that there's kind of some different legends laid out here. The social vulnerability classification, and then under that, the social vulnerability index score is what we're really looking for there. You can zoom into your site, to your area, and you can click and identify, and it will tell you if it's high or low, and we do then score on that classification. Then we also do score and want to look at what the recreation need is for this. And as of last year, we updated this criteria, so do please look carefully at that section. There are two options to determine the land-based need. One option is the DCR nature-based recreation access model, or you can do the Trust for Public Lands Conserved park need model. It depends on whether your location is rural or urban, and that will determine which model will be best suitable for your project. Conserve is more for the suburban and urban areas and doesn't quite hit on all of the rural areas in Virginia. So do walk through that. We have some information in the manual about it, and you can reach out to us if you have questions. And then for water-based, Conserve doesn't really cover that. So you will just use the DCR nature-based recreation access model to determine that water-based access need. This is for a maximum of 10 points. And I'll show you a little bit about the nature-based recreation access model. This is available on that Natural Heritage Data Explorer. And I would just advise you to be sure to toggle between both the water and land access. So this is when you open it up, you can do it in NHDE or within the application, and you can see that there's one layer for land-based recreation need with a color scale. You can click and identify as well, and then a separate layer for the water-based recreation need. So do look at that carefully. For the Conserve model, this is just some screenshots there. You'll go to the Trust for Public Land Conserve website. You can enter the closest town or city that you're near and search. If it doesn't come up, then that means that it's probably not within this database or it's too rural. But a lot of them do come up in Virginia. So you would click, there will be some summary information, and then you would say see map, and then you would zoom into where your project area is and see about the priority area for new parks. And this is largely based on the walking distance and travel distance between areas that already have parks and how far the next park is. So lots of information available from the Trust for Public Lands, but that's the information that we'll be needing for scoring. All right. And then Conserve Virginia, we've all talked about different parts of that. And specifically here for the recreation, the open space and parks category, it is really how much percentage of the property you're proposing for open space and parks is within any Conserve Virginia layer. So you can look at the Conserve Virginia map, zoom into your property and make an estimate. We'll be checking that estimate behind the scenes on our GIS as well, thanks to Gina and VLCF staff. So your best estimate is what we're looking for there. And I think that covers all of the different criteria. I know I flew through that pretty quickly, but do reach out if you have any questions about that. And then I just wanted to take this opportunity to let you know about a few other federal recreation grants that we do manage at DCR in the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. We manage the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and sometimes basically if the stars align, you can stack VLCF and LWCF funding for certain land acquisition opportunities. This is a 50-50 match reimbursement federal grant program from the National Park Service. The properties must be for public outdoor recreation in perpetuity. And we are currently in the grant round process of submitting projects to the National Park Service for authorization. We had a grant round this past winter, and depending on available funding, we'll have another grant round in 1 to 2 years. The subset of this program, one of those programs is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Program. You may be hearing more about that in the coming months. And then the other large program we manage is Recreational Trails Program. And this is an 80-20 match reimbursement specific for the engineering and construction of recreation trails provided by the Federal Highways Administration. And the grant round closed this spring, and we are now moving projects forward for authorization. And pending that federal funding availability, we hope to offer this annually. So again, thank you. I'm Crystal McKelvey. My contact information is in the manual, and I appreciate your time today. Let's see if I can stop sharing screen. Hold on. Stop sharing. Okay, thank you. Any questions? You're muted, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Crystal. That was great. Thank you for your presentation. And Joe, I know we have one question from Joe McCauley. Joe, did you want to unmute yourself and share that, or did you want to write it? There you go.
Hey.
Hi.
Well, first, thank you for hosting this this briefing. Very informative. Appreciate it, and to all the presenters as well. My question involves the newly allowed tribal eligibility, and I work on behalf of Chesapeake Conservancy, and for years now the Conservancy has been working on behalf of and in partnership with the Rappahannock tribe to return their presence and stewardship and ownership of lands within their well-documented indigenous cultural landscape along the Rappahannock River. And we completed phase 1 of a project in February of this year. And in that project, a conservation easement was conveyed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and fee title was conveyed to the Rappahannock tribe, returning 465 acres to tribal stewardship and ownership. It didn't take long in that process to realize that there were some issues that we and many of us have really never encountered before, and that they sent around the issue of tribal sovereignty and its intersection with federal government sovereignty, in this case with the easement going to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We realized that there were issues involving the federal trust doctrine with tribes and how that played into this issue. And as the tribe is and the Conservancy are contemplating an application to VLCF to help with phase 2 of this project, which would add another 703 acres to tribal ownership. These issues of sovereignty, again, come to the forefront, and it comes down to a matter of capacity, really, for the tribes at any given time. The tribes may have several grant application deadlines looming, and I know that that's certainly the case with the Rappahannock tribe. So these applications, really can stretch the capacity of the tribes considerably. And I know that in this case, the Rappahannock and the Conservancy would like to understand if there's sufficient flexibility and the accompanying legal backing on the part of the Commonwealth to make an application work in practice. And I know that it's a difficult issue, it's a difficult question to ask, but before the tribe commits to submitting to VLCF or other state programs, I know that they and we would like to have a better understanding if there's sufficient legal standing for arrangements that would protect the values that VLCF and other state programs want to protect, but may not do it in the exact way prescribed by the rules. For example, having to have easements conveyed to respective state agencies. So I'm sorry for that being such a long-winded question, but it's a very complicated issue, as you know. So I will stop and hear what you have to say.
Okay. Well, as you just said at the end there, this is very complicated. And we as staff have reached out to our leadership as well as to the AG's office and have been advised that for tribal applications, we should recommend that they contact us in advance, like you've done with this one particular project. And each project is going to have to be kind of assessed individually because of the different level on spring. This one that you've presented to us seems to me like it would be a good project, but I have to wait to hear from leadership as well as the AG's office about the legalities. And if it seems to me what we're trying to do, which is permanent land conservation, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service holding an easement on property that will then be owned by the tribe, seems to accomplish permanent land conservation. But we have to wait until we hear from them. If that proposed, the steps that you propose to take will accomplish what we both are trying to accomplish. But with all applicants, there's risk involved of investing time as far as putting all that time into an application, if it's going to get funded or not, because we do have limited funding, so all applications don't get awarded. funding as to how they rank in the categories. So at this point, I can't give you an answer that are interested in applying for this grant round. Please contact us as you start to pull your applications together, and we can help you with your applications as well as run your unique situations up the flagpole with our leadership to try to make each project somehow check the boxes that we need to be checked and accomplish what you are trying to accomplish. So how's that for a longer winded answer than your question?
I think it was a tie.
Okay. I mean, we're so excited to have tribes now eligible, and we're excited to figure out how this is going to work. But unfortunately, we can't answer a lot of questions about if it's going to work one way or another. But we're very invested in making it work with you.
I'm thinking this may lead to some proposals or recommendations for the General Assembly too, to clarify what constitutes permanent conservation.
Sure, that would be helpful. Yeah, and because we have Virginia laws with the Conservation Easement Act and the Open Space Land Act, but if those don't apply, yes, something else, a new law would help us with that. All right, were there any other questions? Again, this was recorded and will be posted on our website, and we'll get all the PowerPoints and have those posted as well. Someone just put a question. Okay. Hi, Laura. Okay, can money, whoops, it just went away on my phone. Can money from a non-VLCF grant specifically allocated to cover due diligence, yes, count as match? Yes, as long as it's for the same project, covering those costs that are associated that we require, then yes, it would count as match. We don't, well, if it's an easement, we do. The appraisal, yes. Anyone else? Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your patience. I see we still have like 30 people that have lasted through the whole thing, and we really appreciate it. And again, please contact us or the agency experts with any questions or as you develop your applications. We're very excited to see your applications. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.